Gorbachev, the USSR's last leader, who was instrumental in opening up the Soviet Union and ending the Cold War, has died aged 91. Now, our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks, worked in Russia in the 1990s. He even interviewed Gorbachev. He joins us now. Simon, what a fascinating time to live in Russia. Tell us about it.
Well, it was astonishing. I was there living in Moscow from 1991 until 1993, although I'd been travelling in and out of the country for a couple of years prior to that. And Gorbachev had burst onto the stage in 1985. Remember that he was the youthful leader of the Communist Party and the head of the regional government in Stavropol in southern Russia, who had taken what we all now know was a fateful walk on a beach, a Soviet beach, with Eduard Shevardnadze, who was the communist leader from Georgia. They were both young, they were both worried about this whole sort of series of elderly, sclerotic leaders, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko. They were worried about the direction the country was taking. So they had this private conversation out of earshot or KGB surveillance on a beach in the former Soviet Union, in which they said to one another, things have got to change around here. And that is how this whole era that Gorbachev introduced of perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness, really began. He appointed Shevardnadze his foreign minister, and he found himself uncorking the demand for change that had become so pent up in the Soviet Union. A younger generation of Russians and people in the other former Soviet republics who were demanding open borders, a chance to travel, a chance to acquire Western fashions, enjoy Western music. But at the same time, Gorbachev found himself hemmed in, because the more he sought to reform the Soviet Union, the more that worried hardliners within the Communist Party, who didn't approve of all the things that he was doing, didn't think that he could manage this tightrope walk of implementing some market economic reforms, bringing some measure of democracy to the country, while maintaining the Communist Party's grip on power. And it was ultimately that balance between the pent-up demand for change on the part of the people and anxieties about the pace of change on the part of hardliners within the Communist Party that proved to be his undoing, which followed from the attempted coup. It actually was a failed coup in August of 1991 against him. But once those dramatic 4 days in 1991 came to an end, he was restored to power, but he was never restored to a position of authority. And within 4 months, he resigned, dissolved the Soviet Union. Boris Yeltsin took over in Russia. The constituent parts of the Soviet Union became independent states, and the rest is very much history.
What was he like to interview?
You know, I interviewed him in 1995, so he'd been out of power for about 4 years by then, but he was talking about the possibility of returning to the political fray. He did not believe that his time had, at that point, necessarily passed. He never did re-enter the political fray, but then he was running a foundation, a think tank in Moscow, and it was an extraordinary moment. I mean, meeting him and being with him, we were together for about an hour and a half. He absolutely, from the moment you met him, looked deep into your eyes, grabbed you by the arm. It was almost like talking to your favourite uncle. I mean, he genuinely was a deeply engaging figure. And of course, this is what Western leaders had discovered. Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister, after she first met him, famously described him as a man we can do business with, even though she didn't agree with any of the political viewpoints that he espoused about communism and its values. Ronald Reagan, of course, had been wowed by him, and Gorbachev had wowed people here in America. There's a famous video image of Gorbachev alighting from his motorcade on Connecticut Avenue, blocks from the White House, and mingling with passers-by and introducing himself to ordinary Americans on the streets. The world had never seen anything like that before. When I was with him in 1994, I got a flavour of that, but also a flavour of his steely determination. He said he was going to go to his grave fervently believing in communist values, even though at the time he was not ready to support the leader of the Communist Party at that point, because he didn't trust him and didn't believe that he was necessarily going to do all the things in power that he was pledged to do.
So how did Gorbachev get on with Vladimir Putin? Because it looks like Vladimir Putin's trying to put the Soviet Union back together again, annexing Crimea in 2014, now invading Ukraine.
Yeah, very complicated relationship, Sally, and we've seen that play out just in the last few hours, with the Kremlin issuing a statement on behalf of President Putin, offering condolences to the family and friends of Mikhail Gorbachev, and then the Kremlin spokesman saying that he was an extraordinary global statesman, but he made a mistake, and that was trying to warm relations between Russia, the Soviet Union, and the West. And so this has been a complicated relationship, because certainly in the last 15 of Vladimir Putin's 20 years in power, Gorbachev had been a critic of Putin, a careful and cautious critic of Putin, but a critic nonetheless. And you know, when I interviewed him in 1995, Gorbachev expressed the view that Russia absolutely had at its centre to maintain a commitment to democracy, that a modern Russian state living at peace with its neighbours absolutely had to be underpinned by democracy. His death coming at this time in which Vladimir Putin's waging war in Ukraine has exercised absolute total control over the media in Russia and the message that is being delivered to Russian people, has jailed his opponents, has cracked down on a free press. You know, all of this underscores the fact that the promise that was lit by Mikhail Gorbachev in between, 1985 and 1991 now appears completely to have evaporated, like the blink of an eye.
And very briefly, Simon, significant responses and tributes paid to him today?
Yeah, absolutely. They were led, of course, by President Biden here in the United States, who has said that Mikhail Gorbachev was a man of remarkable vision, saying after decades of brutal political repression, he embraced democratic reforms. He said these were the acts of a rare leader. You heard similarly warm sentiments being expressed by many Western leaders, including British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, European leaders, the French President Emmanuel Macron and others. And yet there is a distinction between the warmth of those tributes and the reaction that's coming from some parts of the former Soviet Union. The Lithuanian government, Gorbachev cracked down on protests bloodily in Lithuania as he attempted to assert Soviet power. The Lithuanians have said today that they can never forgive him for the scale of the bloodshed that took place there, the bloodshed that took place in the Caucasus, in southern Russia. A very, very mixed record and a complicated legacy.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for chatting to us. That's our Washington correspondent, Simon Marks.